Okay, hello everyone. I am going to just run you through how you might change some aspects of this My Data Feelings app. I've gotten a lot of questions about how this can be done, so I'm just going to make a video to run you through how all this stuff works. Okay, so let's assume that we are starting from the very, very beginning. And what you might do is you might go to this GitHub repo, My Data Feelings. You can see it here. You can see it here on GitHub, and let's say that you just want to run the completed example that I provided. So what you're going to do is you'll go to clone or download, and let's just download the zip just for now. Okay, so this thing will be downloaded. I'm going to open this up, and let's just drag this onto our desktop for now. Okay, so My Data Feelings. Okay, excellent. So I've got this folder living on my computer, and the first thing what we're going to do is we're going to cd into this folder. So this is a terminal window. I'm going to do cd. I'm going to drag this thing into here. Okay, so now I'm in this folder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go npm install. And what this is going to do is it's going to install all of the dependencies that are required to build this project. And that's going to take a minute. You might have noticed that there's this new folder which is just like popped up there. All right, cool. So once we've installed all the dependencies, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to run MongoDB. So if you've looked in the setup for this example, you know that you have to install MongoDB. But once that's installed, what you can do is type in your terminal, in another terminal window, MongoD. And once you type MongoD, all this stuff will print out, and that's just to tell you that MongoDB is now running. And so what we're going to do is just going to leave that running in the background. We don't want to mess with it because we need to make sure that MongoDB can accept any of the data that we're going to send it. Okay, so now we're going to go back up into this terminal window where we install all the things, and we're going to run npm run dev. And we're doing run dev so that we can run this in development mode. So if we run this, we'll see that, oh, we've got something happened, and let's just open this thing up. So now we're prompted to log in or sign up. And the thing that a lot of you probably have done is just gone directly and sign up and log in without including anything here. You don't want to do this because what it'll do is store a username and password without any username or password, and so when it goes to do authentication, the feathers won't really know, actually, won't be able to check against anything, and then you'll get an error, and then you'll have to delete your user's collection and all this stuff. So let's just type in test@test.com. And I'll just type my password as test. This is all stored locally, so you don't have to worry about it going anywhere. So I'm going to do sign up and log in. Fingers crossed. Okay, cool. So I have data living in here already, and you can see that we've got our little admin panel here. Let's say I'm going to say I'm excited. I have got some low anxiety. I'm kind of stressed out. I'm still content with my life. My productivity is kind of and I didn't do any fitness today, so I'm going to submit this, and now we have a new entry. Okay. This is all fine and good, and as long as everything is running, then you will have this to see. But let's say you don't want to go through all the steps to setting up feathers from scratch and then creating all the views and all these things. How might we go about and just start to change the visual style of these components, and how might we start to add new parameters to our visualization? So that's what I'm going to run you through right now. Okay, so let's go into one of our terminal windows. And I'm going to create a new tab by doing Command T. So what this will do is open up a new tab, and I'm going to open up our code in Visual Studio Code. All right, so we have our folders here. This is our project scaffold. And the way we're going to do it is that we're first going to edit our data model. And so if we go into Source, Models, and our feelings.model.js, you'll see that we have these properties which currently correspond to our admin panel here. So we've got mood, anxiety, stress, contentment, productivity, and fitness today. This is an input with a type text. This is an input which is a range slider. Those are more sliders, and this is a selection, a radio selection. So you can see that we have mood, which is a string. We have anxiety, which is a number. Stress, contentment, productivity. Those are all these are numbers, and fitness is a Boolean, true or false. Okay, so in this case, I decide that I want to add a parameter for the number of smiles that I've had today. So I'm going to add in a new property called smiles, and I'm going to specify the type as a number, and I'm going to say this is required. True. Okay, so the next thing what we're going to do is we're going to save this, and what we have to do now that we updated our data model is that we've got to go and update our views. So imagine that we've updated the type of properties that our database can accept, and what we need to do is make sure that we can create form inputs that allow us to send data to those properties in our database. So we're going to go to our public folder, and then you'll notice that we have a bunch of files in here. And our first stop on our journey after that we've now edited this, this models file is this Views.js. So if we go into Views.js, we'll see that we've got some HTML which has been included in these ES6 template string backticks. And so you can see for our login, we've got like the HTML markup for that. For our visualization, we've got this little bit of HTML here. Each one of those canvas grids ends up in that little ends up in this section here. So those all get appended in a loop. And this is our admin panel. This is where we want to add in our markup for our new Smiles input range slider. So we can see we have some field sets. We've got our mood, our anxiety, our stress, our contentment, our productivity. And what I'm going to do is just add in this another range slider for our Smiles parameter. So I'm going to change the legend to Smiles, and I'm going to change, so that's a range type. I'm going to change this to Smiles. I'm going to change the name to Smiles. There's no placeholder here. Let's keep it from 1 to 10. And let's say our Smiles, so this is just a label that gets updated as you drag the slider. So now we've updated our admin panel. So if I refresh this, and we go back here, we'll see, aha, we've got our Smiles range slider here. You'll notice that if I drag this handler, there's no number which is updating in the same way that these are updating over here. And that's because in our JavaScript, we add an event listener to catch whenever this range slider is changing. So why don't we update that now? So we've updated our views. The next thing we're going to do is attach that event listener to this, this input. So let's go into index.js. And you'll notice that we have like our pretty standard P5.js setup here. We have setup and we have draw. And what we're seeing is that actually a ton of complexity is being wrapped up in our class that we called app, and that is starting up the entire process. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig into this app class that we defined. It could be called anything. It could be called rainbows, butterflies, whatever that you want. But we need to go in here and do a few things. So in our admin panel, we want to add our Smiles input as something that is being listened to. So this event listener is being called. So let's call this Smiles input. And we'll call this is the ID that matches the markup in our views. So that was Smiles input, and our ID, Smiles input. So it's good that we caught this. So let's do Smiles input. Okay. So let's now go back to index.js. So Smiles input, and what we want to do is add this Smiles input to this array so that we can loop through and add these event listeners. What this loop is doing is that it's listening, or it's attaching an event listener that every single time you move that event listener, or move that range slider, update the value in that span tag, which we're selecting based on the ID and this label, and this updates that as it's changing. So if we save this, the last thing we have to do on our stop is see where it says async submit feelings. So this is where our data gets submitted in a post request to our database. And what you'll see is that we have our form, which gets selected from the ID of our form that we specified. So this is called mood form. If we hop back into our views, we can see that our form, where our data gets sent, is called mood form, and that corresponds here. So we're selecting that form, and we're defining a payload. Payload is just a generic word for all the data that gets sent somewhere, in this case to our database. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add Smiles as part of our properties, myForm.get Smiles. And so when you say myForm.get Smiles, we've created a new form type of data, and what we're going to do is get that parameter based on the name that we defined of the input. So let's look at that. So Smiles, myForm.getSmiles. So the property is called smiles, and we want to get the smiles property from our input. So if we go back to views, we'll see that the name is called smiles. And so that corresponds with how we pull that piece of data out of our form. Okay, so the rest of it, this checks if we're authenticated, and this allows us to create that new data set in our database. Okay, excellent. So once that has been set, the last thing that we need to do is update how that piece of data gets rendered in P5 after we've submitted that data. So if we go into MyFeelings.js, we'll see that every instance of our visualization is, or each grid square in our visualization reflects like a piece of data that we've produced each time we submit a form. And so now we're going to have a new property called smiles, and you can see that like each of those properties then are accessed using this this dot syntax. So data.anxiety, data.contentment, data.productivity, data.stress, all of that data can be accessed this way because when we make that GET request to pull data from our database, these are the properties in that data set that we're seeing. So we have now this smile slider. So why don't we add, for example, a circle, depending on the number of smiles that we had. So let's say sketch.ellipse, and let's do that in the center, and we can do data.smiles, and let's just multiply this by 10 just to make sure that it's big enough. And I'm going to move this down here. Cool. So now we've got this smiles parameter, and let's see if P5 complains. Okay, so nothing is happening, but what we can do is let's say curious, and then I'm going to drag these down. I'm going to add 10 smiles. Let's say I did fitness. I submit this, and now we have our circle popping up. So that is the full workflow of how this works. So just to recap, we started in models. We added a new property and specified what type it is. Once we added that new model, or that new property to our model, we went into our views and we added a new form input in our form under admin.html. We then went into index.js and we updated how that input is selected. Just note that this step is only really relevant for the range sliders. It's not so important for input type texts or the radio buttons. This is just that we can update that number as we're sliding the slider. Then we added that property, the name of that property, to our form submission. So this should match, the name in our input should match here, and the name here should match what our data model expects. And lastly, we go into our MyFeelings.js and we add whatever styling you feel like putting in there. So that is the full workflow. If we wanted to get a little crazy here, what we could do, or imagine doing, is adding like mouse X here and sketch.mouse Y. Let's move this out of this push pop. And I'm going to take this loop off. So now, if we re-render this, now I can move stuff around here, but not in here because the mouse X, the smiles property only lives in here. So I hope that was useful for you. And I think if you're really trying to focus on just mapping new properties of like your emotions to a different type of visualization style, that's the workflow that you want to go through. Like just keep all of the scaffolding that came from my example that I showed you in this my data feelings repository, and do this workflow where you update the model, you update the views, you update index.js, and you update myfeelings.js. And once you've done that, then you can kind of explore all of the creative potential of having a full stack web application to store your data and show the views every time that you check the website. All right, so that wraps up this video. Thank you.